This is a video by Richmond. Today we are working on a Saturn S series. This happens to be a 1998 model. And what we're doing today is we are replacing our front brakes. Now the first thing we got to do is get the vehicle up in the air, support it on jack stands, and take our tires off. The first thing we want to do is get that piston away from the pads a little bit so it makes disassembling a little easier. We'll get a screwdriver right in here. Okay. Now we can remove our caliper. Now before we remove our pins that hold the caliper on, I'm going to mark this top one right here, because a lot of times there are differences between the pins, and the size of those bolt heads are 14 millimeter. Now we're going to take a wire right here, and we're going to support that caliper from the coil spring on the strut. Now, next thing we got to do is we got to remove our pads. Sometimes they'll come off easy. That's the outboard. There's the inboard. Now, what we're going to do, just in case that rotor wants to come flying off there. Alright, so now we have to remove our caliper mount right here. It's held on by two 18 millimeter headed bolts. Alright, now we can remove our caliper mount. Sometimes the rotor will come off easy, sometimes you got to work on it. So, this one came right off. Now, we live up in the salt belt, and these rotors, boy, they like to weld themselves on, so I like to take a little bit of brake grease, just a little on the hub. Just so that rotor can get off there next time. Alright, so let's put our rotor on. We use one of the lugs to hold it in place for us. Alright, now we can put our caliper mount back on. Now pay attention to these shims right here. If they're pitted, rusted, in bad shape, now is the time to replace those. Now I will double check those bolts before I'm done. Next thing we need to do is put our pads into position. Stay there. Right, now we can bring the caliper down. And we want to make sure that that piston is back in there all the way. You can take a C-clamp or a tool like this. Okay, the piston is back all the way. Now I'm going to put a little bit of brake grease on these contact areas where it contacts the pad. Most people like to put it on the pad themselves, but tends to use a little bit less this way. Get that boot there. Nobody said this was not a messy job. Now you see that brake line right there? Make sure it's in that configuration right there. Sometimes you can put this caliper on the wrong way and the hose is way over here, and you turn your steering wheel and you hear this awful noise, and it's a tire hitting the brake hose. Now we're going to take our brake grease here and we're going to lube the pins. Otherwise our caliper ain't gonna move too freely. Now, for some reason this bottom bolt likes to not be as free here. So when I had the caliper mount off, I got a lot of lube in the boot there. Alright. The bolts are started. Now I will go over those bolts just to make sure that they are tight. Okay, so we got one side done. So all we have to do is do the same thing to the other side. And one of the most important things about this job is after you get the tire back on, you want to pump the brakes to bring the pads in contact with the rotor. Otherwise you'll go down the road and you won't have any brakes, and that wouldn't be fun. Alright, so that's all there is to doing a front brake job on your Saturn S series.